Hola amigos, bienvenidos una vez más a tu canal Méndez Vet. En esta ocasión les traigo la segunda parte, el segundo capítulo, que lo dividí en dos partes para que fuera más fácil su comprensión. Espero les haya gustado el primero. Si no lo has visto, les dejo en la descripción el enlace. Esto es increíble, estamos acá a menos 25. Se me hace que este botellón de agua ya no lo voy a poder utilizar más. Miren esto, miren esto. Miren cómo se congeló. Completamente. Hace 48 horas lo puse acá. Se me olvidó llevarlo a la casa y como pueden ver, hasta se deformó. Este ya no va a servir. Está completamente congelada el agua. Entonces acá les dejo mis observaciones. Sí les voy a grabar desde dentro del coche porque se hace bastante frío acá. Déjenme cerrar acá. Bueno, como les decía, en el capítulo número 1 tratamos la temática de los métodos tradicionales de control y de tratamientos para el cáncer que se usan habitualmente, como la quimioterapia, la radiación y la cirugía, que es a lo que acuden la mayoría de los médicos veterinarios, siendo estos métodos altamente invasivos, a los cuales hay que acudir cuando es estrictamente necesario. Considero que sí se resuelven muchos problemas a través de la cirugía, pero siempre es más interesante y más válido el tema de la prevención y conocer los orígenes del cáncer en nuestras mascotas, para trabajar enfocados un poco más en la prevención y menos en tratar las consecuencias del cáncer. No tiene el cáncer en nuestras mascotas un origen genético. Las consecuencias sí son genéticas, sobre todo mutaciones que dan al traste con cambios en el genoma. Descubrimos también en el video pasado, en el capítulo anterior, que el origen del cáncer en nuestras mascotas está dado por cambios metabólicos que se originan en las mitocondrias de cada célula. También en el documental se comenta sobre estadísticas realmente lamentables de las que hay que hablar para tener una visión de cuál sería el problema general del cáncer de mascotas en el mundo. Si no has visto el primer capítulo, acá te dejo una tarjeta donde vas a poder acceder luego que termines este video, y también al final del video vas a tener el enlace, así como en la descripción de este video vas a poder acceder al capítulo número 1 para que sea de mejor comprensión el resto de lo que te voy a estar compartiendo acá en el canal. Este segundo capítulo que te presento lo dividí en dos partes por su extensión para que no se hiciera tan largo. En esta primera parte descubriremos a fondo todo lo relacionado con la industria del pet food o la comida para mascotas. Tendrás interesantes testimonios sobre algunos especialistas de la industria del pet food, donde ellos mismos revelan la realidad sobre la industria del pet food que muchos veterinarios no te comentan. Y es comprensible que no te lo comenten por el hecho de que hay intereses económicos de por medio, al ser esta una industria millonaria. Como ya te he comentado en mi canal, si has visto alguno de mis anteriores videos, yo soy promotor de las dietas naturales, caseras, y donde nos acerquemos bastante a la forma natural en la que se alimentaban nuestros animales antes del surgimiento de la comida para mascotas. Vamos a desenmascarar completamente a todo lo relacionado con la industria del pet food. Vas a ver algunas entrevistas súper interesantes de especialistas. Vas a conocer también ingredientes específicos, concretos, dañinos que están presentes en algunas de las marcas más conocidas de croquetas o de pet food. Y recuerda algo, este solamente es una parte de muchos capítulos que ya tengo en mi poder que vamos a compartir acá en el canal. Si es de interés para ti toda esta temática que estamos tratando, te invito a suscribirte, a activar la campanita de notificaciones para que no te pierdas nada de lo que vamos a seguir compartiendo acá. Te invito a que veas el video hasta el final. Déjame tus comentarios de qué te ha parecido, si tienes alguna observación, ya sea a favor o en contra. Estamos abiertos a cualquier tipo de comentario. Debido a que esto es un tema altamente polémico, no me voy a molestar con nada de lo que me escriban acá en los comentarios. Esto es un canal completamente inclusivo y sin más, bueno, comenzamos.
Welcome back to The Truth About Pet Cancer. I'm your host, Ty Bollinger. I'm excited to share this enlightening journey with you so that you can become empowered with life-saving information that will help you enjoy a happier and healthier life with your pet. Were you able to watch episode 1? I hope so, but just in case you missed it, here's a brief recap. In episode number 1, we saw some shocking statistics about the epidemic of pet cancer that has blanketed the globe. We explored the current conventional medical toolkit for treating cancer, which is comprised of chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. We scrutinized the current theories on exactly what cancer is and whether it's primarily a genetic disease. We heard from several respected veterinarians who shared their personal educational experiences while in veterinary school. We also examined the war on cancer and were amazed to learn that most medical research is actually not independent at all. In episode number 2, we're going to learn some inside information of the pet food industry. We'll examine the science of epigenetics and nutrigenomics, and we'll learn about species-appropriate diets. We'll dive into the facts about GMOs, herbicides like Roundup, and cooked commercial pet food, also known as kibble. To begin with, please remember that knowledge is power, and we must understand history to understand why we are where we are with the pet food industry.
If you look at the history of pet food starting back in the late 1800s in England, they were using the materials that were left over as part of the human food processing industry. And this way, they had a use for these materials that otherwise would be wasted or thrown away, and they used them for animal food, because animals don't need good nutrition, they're just animals. I mean, that's always been kind of the thought, animals are, service us as far as food sources, beasts of burden, maybe companions as pets, but they're animals, they're not people. They don't have the same needs, the same fastidious needs for good nutrition, and that's totally untrue.
I think what people forget is that it wasn't until the 1950s that the powers that be realized that pets could be a profit center. They're a profit center. So all the human manufacturers realized that all the food that the FDA or the regulatory bodies wouldn't let them feed us, all that substandard, we started getting regulations, started taking care of what was actually coming on the market. Well, we could just put it over here and we give it to the dogs. And then our profit margins will go up because our waste will go down. And then we'll make money over here. Amazing.
Most of the food that's for the cats and dogs comes from rendering plants. Now, the rendering plant is a nasty thing if you want to really look into it down in Mexico and some of these rendering plants where they take all the spoiled meats, they take roadkill off the side of the road, they take all the moldy, putrefied fats, all of this food, and they just stir it around in these big, huge rendering plants. And then they take some of the water out and then they press this into a food. So, I mean, most of the food is cooked, which means there's no activity left in it. And the fact that it's extremely toxic. I mean, you're basically poisoning your pet.
Pet food companies do care about how to make the most money with the least expensive food. And our goal should be to see what is the best and the ideal nutrition.
Dr. Tobias just mentioned pet food companies' efforts to maximize profits rather than focusing on what the ideal and best nutrition is for pets. Is this accurate? At the first of this year, I was out at Cal Jam, which is short for California Jam. It's a huge event in Costa Mesa, California, and I was able to get interviews with Dr. Rick Palmquist, Dr. Joel Furman, and Olivia Newton-John and her husband Amazon John. I was at LAX airport about to fly back to Nashville, and I met a lady named Andrea who was familiar with The Truth About Cancer and said that she recently benefited from our documentaries. She asked why I was in California, and I told her that I was filming interviews for an upcoming pet cancer documentary. Her eyes lit up, and she told me that she used to be a food buyer for one of the multinational pet food companies. She agreed to go on camera and share a little bit about her personal experience.
About 10 to 15 years ago, I was, again, as a commercial manager, sourcing manager for a very large company who manufacture pet food, both dog and cat. And my job was to essentially identify sources of supply for specialty ingredients that would then be used for dog and cat food. Essentially, I would go out and evaluate sources of supply, and I would understand the manufacturing process. But I think what was disturbing, to say the least, because I was very new to this industry, is that essentially what I was buying was the leftover carcass and scraps from slaughtered, cattle or chicken or pig. And what happens is every literal piece of the carcass is saved and sold, and that was even more disturbing. So, you slaughter a pig and it goes into the the manufacturing process to basically skin it, and then you take whatever's left, bones and head and whatever, and you render it, and it goes into a big, huge, literally a big meat grinder, and it's literally ground down into a powder form, and then they take that powder and they put it into the kibble.
I mean, legally, under the definitions of beef or chicken or whatever meals, legally it states that the animal must be slaughtered to be used in that pet food. However, they are allowing what we call 4D meat, which is downer, dead, diseased, dying, so cancerous meat. They can render that down. They can, the cows that have died in the field, and then they sit in the back of the truck being transported across the country, rotting in the truck. They're not refrigerated, and then they just melt it down to a chemical soup, and that goes into pet food. And they say, oh, it's perfectly fine and safe because once you heat it, you kill the bacteria. Well, you don't kill the toxins, the endotoxins that were released by those Clostridium and other bacteria during that decaying process. That's still going in. The law states that they are not allowed to use that kind of meat in pet food. And when we ask FDA, why don't you enforce this? They, oh, yeah, we're not going to enforce that. It's okay. They yell at us and say, oh, you want us to put all of that in the landfill. You're going to fill up all the landfills. How dare you? You're polluting our environment. Okay, great. Better to pollute my dog.
After hearing about how pet food is actually made and the nasty ingredients, are you having second thoughts about feeding your pet kibble? We all want to feed our pets healthy food, but it's hard to do if you don't know what's in the food, or if you don't read the labels, or if the pet food companies change the names of ingredients so as to cover up what's actually in the kibble.
First of all, one of the things that happens at these meetings is they sit there and try to design new ways to hide ingredients. So there is a hypoallergenic pet food that is made with hydrolyzed chicken feathers. So the main ingredient of the food is chicken feathers. And it used to say on the bag, under the ingredient list, it used to say hydrolyzed chicken feathers. Well, then people like me outed them and said, hey, anybody reading the ingredients on that bag, do you realize you're feeding chicken feathers and you're paying $90 a bag to feed chicken feathers to your dog? Like, how are you feeling about that? And it's a bunch of synthetic chemicals added to actually, give some nutrition. And so at the last AFCO meeting, that company proposed a new definition and they got it approved. And now it is hydrolyzed poultry protein isolate.
Oh, they just changed the name.
They just changed the name. So if you're the consumer and you see hydrolyzed poultry protein isolate, you're probably going to go, well, it's probably chicken meat that's, had some process done to it so that the body doesn't recognize it as an antigen, which, by the way, it still does, but the diet only works 50% of the time. But they just basically changed the name so that the consumer has no clue.
That's a dirty trick, changing the name of ingredients to make them sound more palatable or healthy. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. They wouldn't let known cancer-causing ingredients be used in pet formulas, would they?
Other things that they allow to happen, ethoxyquin is a proven cancer-causing preservative. It's used very commonly to preserve fish meal. If the ethoxyquin is added on the boat at sea, then it doesn't have to be included on the label of the pet food. If it's added at the processing plant, the pet food plant, then it does have to be on the label. So you could be feeding a fish meal food that has ethoxyquin, but you don't know it. And the company doesn't have to tell you.
That is shocking. If the cancer-causing agent is added to the carcasses before arriving at the pet food manufacturing plant, then it does not have to be included on the label. Just to be clear, ethoxyquin is commonly found in many popular brands of pet food, and it's been linked to canine liver and kidney cancer. Other ingredients to look out for are BHA, which has been linked to tumors and liver failure, and BHT, which is another preservative, linked to cancer and endocrine disruption. I asked Dr. Morgan if there were previous instances where pets had been harmed or even died from some of these unlabeled ingredients.
So, back in 2006, we had the melamine toxicity that killed tens of thousands of pets with kidney disease because that was added overseas in China. Nobody bothered to test it in the wheat gluten. We have propylene glycol as a preservative. We have tons of sugar. We have tons of salt. They're used as preservatives. We have red dyes. The dog doesn't care if it's dyed green, yellow, purple, and red. That's all for the consumer. And the pet food companies are spending a lot more money on advertising, the big ones, than they are on ingredients. And so when we go to these meetings, there are industry representatives in there from the waste oil industry and from the grocery waste industry, and they're just trying to figure out how to sell their waste products to pet food companies so they get paid for all their waste products. So recycled restaurant oils. It doesn't go into dog food, but it goes into cattle feed, which we all should be concerned about, but grocery store waste. So all those expired dairy products, all those expired bakery products go out in the dumpster, sit in the sun for a while, then they get picked up, and then they go to a plant, and they get all mashed together and ground up, and then it goes into cattle feed. So all those plastics, they've got glyphosates, they've got chemicals. We're feeding it to the cows. Well, do you think it comes out in the milk and the meat? Yeah.
Did your veterinarian tell you that formulas from all 5 of the top pet food manufacturers that control up to 90% of the pet food market in the United States were recalled in 2007 by the FDA because they contained ingredients from China that sickened and killed untold numbers of cats and dogs by poisoning them with melamine? I wonder if they even knew that information. After hearing about how pet food is actually made and the nasty and oftentimes cancer-causing ingredients, are you having second thoughts about the integrity of pet food? Are we literally feeding our pets cancer? Have you ever heard of a new field of science called nutrigenomics, which is using nutrition to influence genetic expression, kind of like nutritional epigenetics?
Scientists now know that genes alone don't determine health outcomes. Epigenetic factors, which determine gene expression, actually choose the path of health or disease for any organism, including pets or humans. And nutrigenomics is about how nutrition affects genetic expression. You see, you have blueprints for perfect health, but if those genes aren't properly expressed through nutritional factors, then you're never going to experience the perfect health that you were meant to have or your pet was meant to have.
Proactive veterinarians like myself, really our focus goal is to help people realize what can we do if there is a genetic predisposition there, what can we do to help reduce the expression of that, which is called epigenetics, and we can use nutrition called nutrigenomics to modulate the animal's expression of DNA. But that's something that you would have to learn after vet school because it's not even mentioned in vet school, frustratingly so. I believe in what's called species-appropriate nutrition, which means dogs and cats by nature are carnivores. They're carnivorous animals, so they can consume some grains, but it's not biologically appropriate. It's not species appropriate.
I love observing nature, and especially in Africa, because that system is so perfect. If you think about it, the herbivores eat from the land, and then the herbivores are eaten by the carnivores, and then the carnivores, when they die, they feed the land again. So the cycle of nutrients is really amazing. And nobody's surprised that a lion eats meat and horse or some sort of wildebeest eats grass. But in the current state of medical nutrition or nutrition that we use in veterinary medicine, we're feeding our canines ingredients and items that they would never eat in nature. Canines would eat meat, bones, and some plant material. They wouldn't eat wheat, and they wouldn't eat corn and all these ingredients that are in pet food. Plus, they wouldn't eat chemicals and preservatives that obviously have been used.
Getting the cats and the dogs on species-appropriate diets is critical, and as you pointed out, very importantly, no animal cooks his or her food. And on top of that, they don't, let's say as cats and dogs primarily, they don't target when they kill an animal as a predator. They don't target the muscle, right? That's scavenger meat. That's when the birds, scavengers come down. They're going after the organs, the mineral-rich, parts of the animal.
Animals instinctively know how to find the appropriate food to provide their bodies with the information that they need to run in a healthy state. And animals in the wild are getting plenty of probiotics. Here's how.
Well, yeah, sure. So you have a big cat in the wild, they're going to go for the bone, cartilage, organ meat first.
Yep.
before even going for the muscle.
And interestingly enough, the way they got their probiotics, because they did eat probiotics, is after they killed their prey, they tore through the intestinal tract. So they degutted that animal. Well, when they did that, they're tearing through the intestinal tract, and then all that effluent, green, rich chlorophyll, delicious stuff for them is in their mouth, and then they're just swallowing it.
One of the interesting arguments that the veterinarians use for why you should not feed the dog raw meat is because they're afraid of a bacterial infection. Yeah, right? So these dogs are eating a rotted piece of junk on the side of the road, right? You know, dogs eat carrion, which is rotting meat. You know, they're a scavenger species. Scavenger species will eat anything. And you're worried about a dog can digest almost anything, right? So you're worried about a bacteria. If you get a good organic chicken, grind it up and give it to the dog, what are you worried about? If a little bad, the dog will be getting so much healthier from that.
Veterinarians are the only wellness profession that actually tell you to eat more processed food, and fresh food could be risky. We don't know if it's safe to feed fresh food.
If raw food were dangerous for animals, there would be no animals left on the planet.
Mike Adams' statement may seem simple, but it's truly profound if you think about it. Let me ask you a question. How do you starve a tumor cell? Any idea? When an animal or a person is eating primarily fats with moderate proteins and not many carbohydrates, their body will adapt into a state called ketosis. This is the fundamental premise of the ketogenic diet, where the body burns fat molecules called ketones for energy rather than sugar or carbohydrates.
A ketone is a water-soluble metabolite of fat. Okay, so if we stop eating for a couple of days, after 36 hours, stop eating, we're not taking in food. So our body has an ability to generate energy from within. And we have a quick storage which is called glycogen, which is in our liver and muscles. And that's just long chains of sugars hooked together. So when we stop eating and we start going to glycogen, so we start chopping down this chain and we get sugar that way. But the body hormonally recognizes that we're starting to cut into a ready reserve. And therefore, another hormone, glycogen, turns on and starts to take fat from our body. Our adipocytes start releasing triglycerides into the bloodstream. And the triglycerides, which are just fat molecules basically, is your white fat is triglycerides. That goes to the liver, and the liver has enzymes that, like a wood chipper, like putting logs into a wood chipper, these long chain fatty acids go into the hepatocytes, these liver cells, and they chop up these fats into these water-soluble ketone bodies. And the ketone bodies now flood into the bloodstream, and they serve as the alternative fuel to glucose, in the brain especially, because the brain uses almost exclusively glucose. It doesn't burn fatty acids, whereas heart will burn fatty acids. And liver burns fatty acids for energy, and muscles burn fatty acids. But all the cells will burn ketones and fatty, except the brain, they only burn ketones. So glucose or ketones, they don't burn anything else. So what we're doing then is transitioning the energy away. Now, well, why can't the tumor cells use the ketones? What makes them? And it turns out ketones require a strong mitochondria. Every cell has the energy processing to make ATP, these little organelles called mitochondria. And Warburg said the mitochondria are defective. Well, a lot of people say Warburg was wrong because they have evidence that mitochondria look okay. Well, that's only on the surface. When you look on deep, you can see that they have problems. As a matter of fact, we tested Warburg's theory by examining mitochondria structure and function in a whole range of different spontaneous tumors, and none of them had normal lipid composition in the mitochondria, meaning they can't work right, meaning they can't burn ketones. And now, to this day, no one has found any tumor that has a normal composition of this lipid called cardiolipin. It's a special lipid inside the mitochondria that controls the respiratory system. No tumor has this, correct.
So they can't burn ketones?
They can't effectively burn. Maybe they can stumble along a little bit, but many tumor cells have very few mitochondria. The mitochondria they have are defective, so they're not going to be able to utilize the alternative fuel of ketones. So this now becomes an elegant way to marginalize and kill tumor cells.
Once they become highly malignant, and they're just using glycolysis, this inefficient method for energy, that's sugar. And what the cells can't use is ketones, which happens when we either starve or have a high fat, moderate protein, and almost zero carbohydrate diet. So this then opens up cancer's Achilles heel. And my mission was to explain this science in the book and to show why it is that no matter what else we do, we must use two things. One is a ketogenic diet and the other is calorie restriction. Using those two things, any cancer can be starved, but you have to be very strict about what you do.
When you burn fat for fuel, you create a special type of water-soluble fat called ketones. And ketones easily permeate into the brain and all the cellular tissue. They don't need a carrier to go through. And the great thing about ketones is that they burn very efficiently. And they don't create much reactive oxygen species, which can cause a secondary free radical, which is what causes the damage. It's these free radicals that will cause single and double-stranded DNA breaks. Not in the mitochondria, they cause them in the mitochondria because that's where most of the free radicals are created, but then secondarily they cause it in the DNA, which causes the genetic damage that nearly every conventional physician believes is the cause of cancer, and nothing could be further from the truth. Cancer very rarely has a genetic component. There is genetic damage, no question, but it's mediated by metabolic damage that causes secondarily the DNA damage or genetic damage.
Have you seen the ketogenic diet show progress with animals?
Oh yeah, and for the reasons, because the compliance issue is a non-issue when it comes to animals. Because the dog is going to eat whatever you give him. If you give him the food, he's going to eat it. The mouse is the same. Unless the food is so unpalatable that we have to work on that too. Because now the food industry is moving into this space, developing ketogenic diets that are more palatable, less draconian, because the issue is sugar and ketones. Get your sugar as low as you can, get your ketones as high as you can. Therapeutic ketosis, and you have to balance this. You have to be very careful about imbalances in minerals and nutrients and these kinds of things. But that can be easily done.
So therapeutic ketosis can easily be achieved, according to Dr. Seyfried. Have a listen as he shares about how they stumbled upon the importance of fasting and calorie restriction when it comes to healing animals with cancer. Now, this happened while they were experimenting on mice with brain tumors during the testing phase of certain drugs aimed at stopping ganglioside biosynthesis.
We were getting tremendous results with ketogenic diets. At the same time, we were studying drugs it turns out that the drug that we were looking at to stop ganglioside biosynthesis, we like to try it on tumors. We had some mice that had tumors. And it was working. And the company that was making the drug got, whoa, this is far more interesting on a cancer population than it was on a lipid storage disease where there's not as many afflicted. So they said, oh, we'll give you $200,000 to figure out how this drug is working on stopping cancer or slowing the tumor down. So it became clear, so we started to feed the mice that had brain tumors with this drug. And the brain tumors were shrinking. And, but we also noticed that the body weight of the mice was going down at the same time. So we decided to put in a body weight control, like another group of mice that didn't get the drug, but we restrict their food so their body weight was exactly the same as the guy that was getting the drug. And then we looked at the tumors and they were exactly reduced to the exact same size. So we said, whoa, what's going on here? So this drug turned out to be working through calorie restriction. So the drug was causing the mice to stop digesting their food. So the mice were eating the food, but they were losing weight because they weren't digesting the food. So when you put the body weight control in there, where you actually took the food away, it was having the same effect on the growth of the tumor. So of course, unfortunately, the company that was giving us this drug that thought they had some new blockbuster, turned out you could get the same thing by restricting the food. This became unexciting. Like, what is the mechanism by which the drug is working? Well, it's causing the animals to eat less food or digest the food less. Well, this is not exciting. This is not some sophisticated new, well, you can get the same thing if you just go on a therapeutic fast. You don't need the drug.
Ubiquitously through scientific studies with almost all species of animals tested, we find that when we moderately restrict calories in an environment of micronutrient excellence, the animal can live 1.5 times longer and be free of disease and age slower. We're talking about the only proven fountain of youth, proven in a scientific sense to say it's reproducible in every species that you test it with. You know, rats, monkeys, baboons, and humans too, is that if you want to live a long life, you have to moderately restrict calories.
When you have a problem with your dog or your dog is sick, naturally what happens when an animal gets hurt or is sick in nature, they fast.
The human body and the animal body most effectively repairs and detoxifies and heals best in the non-feeding state. Feeding is an anabolic process. It's a building and restorative process of nutrients. And while the body is bringing nutrients in, it's not really as effective as throwing toxins out and doing repair of tissues.
So it's not dangerous, especially if your pet is overweight. One of the most beneficial strategies that you can do for your pet, if you have an overweight pet, is fast them. I can tell you with the highest degree of confidence, not a micro doubt in my mind, your animal will not suffer, it will get healthy. And in fact, Dr. Seyfried, we were at an interview, we were at a brainstorming session in Orlando last year in October, an event that we were attending, and he related this story of this dog they were trying to kill, by fasting him, and they couldn't kill him, he was just getting healthier because they were fasting him. So it really is an extraordinarily powerful intervention. So if your pet is overweight, believe me, it's one of the best things you can do for them.
So we see the importance of therapeutic fasting for animals. I'll bet you never thought that simply fasting your pet could actually help it heal. Cats especially are not good at self-regulating. Their wild ancestors, after all, weren't given bowls of food to eat. They were out hunting for it. If their food is left out for cats to graze on, they probably will. Think about it. How good is your self-control if a big bag of chips is left out all day? Cats eat out of boredom, just like you and I do. If they're not being stimulated or entertained enough, though, they will certainly eat because there's nothing better to do. If you're feeling overwhelmed at all this new information, please don't. We all have a lot to learn when it comes to how to properly feed our pets, and my family is no exception.
With our dog Grizzly, we actually had a really big curve learning about the importance of healthy food for animals. We used to just feed him run-of-the-mill dog food, pure, right off the shelf. I like to think that they have favorite brands, and I have favorite brands that I like to get them, but we would just feed him, anything. But we noticed, this was a couple years ago, we noticed that he was actually throwing up a whole lot. We had no idea why. We liked to let him in the house sometimes. We couldn't let him in the house at all. And it was really bad. He was throwing up, a couple times a day, and we didn't know why. And he stopped eating, and we realized eventually that it was his dog food. We looked at the ingredients, and the first one I believe was corn. There was soy was really high up on the list. It was not actually what you would want a dog to be eating. It was not meat. It was all synthetic products, grains, which of course with the dog food not being organic, they're GMO, filled with poisons and pesticides. So, we figured this is probably what's going on. This is why he's throwing up.
So we immediately started feeding him an organic, grain-free, meat-based dog food. And he immediately got better. And he's just as healthy as can be. And it's amazing the difference just the diet makes. And so Grizzly's still our happy dog, and no more throw up. He's healthy as can be, and he's our happy dog.
We learned with our dog that the saying, you are what you eat, that doesn't just apply to humans. It applies to animals as well. He's a very healthy, strong German Shepherd, but he was reduced to throwing up every day, being very sick and unhealthy because of what he was eating.
Our daughter Brianna just mentioned GMOs. Unfortunately, due to our lack of knowledge at that time, we were feeding Grizzly non-organic kibble, which not only contained GMOs, but also contained massive amounts of glyphosate, which is one of the toxic ingredients in Roundup.
Bueno amigos, hasta aquí la primera parte del capítulo número 2. En la segunda parte les voy a compartir mucha más información valiosa y polémica sobre las dietas para mascotas. Podrás entender a fondo sus componentes. Haz clic acá para que puedas acceder ahora mismo a esa segunda parte y nos vemos dentro.